Sound is a whole different story though. All right, so I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a video clipping, which is a very low quality recording from home videos that are that analog film capture. I have a piece of the Lion King film strip, which the Hollywood version of analog image capture, much better quality than the home versions. So this is just 3 of the frames from the beginning of the Lion King with Rafiki holding up Simba just like that, with the circle of life. And you'll notice there's almost no difference because they have very subtle changes, so it looks nice and smooth. So you guys can pass that around if you want to take a look at the high quality film capture. What I'm going to show you guys with this, so what I'm going to show you with the home version, this is 3 minutes of storage that can be on the film. One this big is 20 minutes of storage, and one this size is 40 minutes of storage. Some of the problems with the actual film are, actually I'm going to rewind the film real quick. Alright, some of the problems with the film, it's light sensitive because it's capturing the light on the film. So it has to be kept in cases, preserved from the light. Otherwise, the film can degrade and fall apart. Color quality starts dropping. So if you watch old films, a lot of times they'll start looking yellow because that's just, the colors start turning into those yellows over time. Alright, and then Lizzie, here's your water bottle. And even Hollywood films tend to turn that yellow over time as well, which is why they have to go back, digitally remaster things, touch up colors when we make it digital. So the film you're watching, how it works is a whole bunch of pictures on the film that you don't want to touch because fingerprints mess it up as well, and the oils on your fingers. Shines in front of a giant flashlight. The giant flashlight shines on the wall or whatever surface you're pointing it at, and then you get your movie. So you guys get the pleasure of watching a couple minutes of my first Christmas. I was a month old, so I'm not in it because I was boring. But you get to see Santa. I know, right?
I can't see the Lion King.
And my older brother and sister getting some presents.
I knew.
So there's Santa and Mrs. Claus came to visit.
That's so beautiful.
What a nice lady. Did you ride this sled?
I was a month old. It was not captured in video, so my guess is probably not.
Oh, look, he's got a bag.
Yeah, I thought he was gonna bag it.
Yeah, he's got a bag of sand. Take him away to walk forward. Take him to sled.
Bye, Santa.
Bye.
Bye, Santa. Wait, why is he going to the chimney?
That's a fake. He's a fake.
Fake.
He's a fake.
So some stranger went into your house.
You have a good 70s hair with my mom right there.
That's how my hair looks.
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
I wish you had that big hair.
You're right, I do.
I wish I had that big hair.
Honestly, the same though. I would drop
But I'm mad.
that.
What'd she get?
Alright.
That looks like my grandma. That's my picture.
You guys want to see a picture of my dead dog?
No.
Start.
Okay, so
Look, you can see the line.
He
okay,
died.
if we get side conversations to cut back down. Now when you were watching that, did it look a little bit jumpy as you were watching it? That's the home version quality projector, showing those 24 frames per second, not perfectly smooth. But the ones in the movie theaters that played the movies, like that chunk of the film strip from The Lion King, the quality of those kept the flow of the film going through much more consistent, so it looked live action rather than a little bit jumpy like the home quality. So the movie theaters had kind of that best of the best preserved. Home versions definitely had that lower quality. All right, so we're going to shift into animation for the rest of it because animation was easier for me to find data that helped, that was relevant for our comparisons. So So I'm gonna put some of that information up on the overhead.
Is that from the original movie?
Yes, it is.
Jack, you're supposed to I give
Oh,
to want to Ben. watch Toy Story.
Hey, I need that back.
What?
I didn't give it to Ben. I kind of forgot about Ben. Oh, I'm good. Sorry, Ben.
Oh, poor Ben.
Ben, you sure?
My
Really?
gosh,
Don't throw
no.
it.
Here you go, Ben.
Again.
Isn't that exciting? Oh, you just got forgotten, Zach.
All right, so for the next part, when I'm going to share information about animation and how that's shifted from analog to digital over time and some of the data with that, we can try and have just a little bit less side conversations. So that way, if you have questions, I can answer them, but people are able to hear that data piece that's relevant that you may want to write down if you're wanting to try and have data from multiple sources. So, before I start comparing the data, we didn't need to know how it works. So this is the same whether it's live action or animation, they first have to make storyboards. This is a storyboard from one of the He-Man episodes from the 80s. And a 20-minute episode would need anywhere from like 28 to 35 storyboards. And that basically outlines the script imagery for kind of basically what they were going for in each scene so they could be passed off to the artist to create the 24 frames per second. Live action, the storyboard would be then handed off to the directors and the actors to create the scenes by acting them out and capturing it on film. So the storyboard was same among all of them. And when we get to animation, what happened next was the boards were passed off to illustrators to do pencil drawings. So this is one from the Little Mermaid where Scuttle's up in the tree getting ready to squawk during the love song between Kiss the Girl when they're doing that boat ride. If you notice on here, Scuttle is missing one of his wings because in a few seconds for this part of the animation, his wing was moving. So they would do separate pencil drawings for each motion of his wing so they could then overlay the motions and not have to redraw Scuttle perfectly every single time. So they get the line drawings next. Then the line drawings would be passed off to inkers. And the inkers would take the line drawings and trace over it with nice clean lines with ink so the lines would show up nice and clear. Inkers had to be perfectly consistent from one picture to the next and from one artist to the next. Because if Ortho's hat changed shape just a little bit, would it mess up the imagery when you were watching the film? Absolutely. Facial features, body features, slightly changed could really throw off the smoothness of the animation. So the many artists that were working together for each of these steps had to really work to basically clone everything perfectly for those 24 frames per second and all of the pieces that would get laid over top of each other. Did you have a question?
No.
So pencil drawings would be then clean line inked, and this still wasn't quite where we ended up. These would be passed off to our painters. The painters would get transparency paper, lay it over top, trace it with ink on the transparency, and then they would paint the back with actual paintbrushes and paint. So then they could have all of the colors, but then the nice clean lines on the front. And if you've ever noticed older animated cartoons, there's not a lot of detail in the clothing or even the features of the characters. Because the more detail there is, the more that detail has to be replicated perfectly from frame to frame and throughout the whole series. So they had to try and keep things fairly simple so they could replicate it consistently without problems. Now, I'm going to show you some of how the pieces get put together, and then I'll take your question or comment. Because they also had to paint the backgrounds, and that's why a lot of the analog or traditional animation tended to have just basic backgrounds, and there was only a few of them, because they'd have to paint every single thing that they would then, each scene the characters would be in. So this is a painting from the Muppet Babies cartoon from the 80s. And we've got Kermit and Miss Piggy on one layer, because they were pretty much just standing there for the few seconds of this scene. But if you notice, Miss Piggy doesn't have a mouth. So the reason she didn't have a mouth, because she was the one that was talking. So if they kept everything on one layer, they would have to redraw this many times to get the few seconds of that 24 frames per second. So they had this one drawing, and then they would have different transparencies for the different shapes of her mouth as she was talking, and then they would just layer that over top. And then when Gonzo joined the scene, they just had to layer him over and shift him across as they were taking photographs to capture it for the film. And so they would have many, many layers. And this is one that I got. I have no idea where this one came from. It was just super cheap to get a lot of the cells. You can see there's a whole bunch of slightly different paintings that they would just swap out one to the next as this lady was walking. They could then lay over the background with the layers of the other characters to get that animation. And so then they would take those photographs at that 24 per second to get the animation.
So if it's 24 per second and the average kind of like cartoon show is like 20 or 22 minutes long, so then like 24 times 60 just for 1 minute is already a bunch. Did they have to draw each and every one of those?
Yes. So now I'm going to give you
So
guys
that's
some
like
numbers.
a couple thousand paintings.
Yeah, crazy numbers, right? So for Snow White, which was the first full-length animated movie, there were 2 million sketches.
Okay.
So these like pencil drawings, 2 million. Because you had to have the one that was like Scuttle's main body, and then each of his wing motions, or in Snow White, every little motion of all of the different characters and the talking and swapping out the mouths and facial motions, each needed